There comes a point in life when walking away says more than staying ever could, when silence speaks louder than years of trying to explain yourself. If you have ever wondered what really happens after you step out of a narcissist's world, not with drama, not with revenge, but with calm and steady silence, then stay with me. Because this is not really about them missing you. It is about what changes when control is gone. It is about what shakes inside them when you choose peace instead of chaos. No contact is often misunderstood. People think it is distance, punishment, or cold behavior. But that is not what it is. It is silence with strength. It is not the silence of fear. It is not confusion. It is not a game. It is the silence that comes from clarity. When someone chooses no contact, they are not vanishing. They are standing firm in their truth. They are saying, without using a single word, I will not keep joining what hurts me. That kind of silence has weight. It feels final because it is intentional. For a long time, many people explain, defend, beg to be understood, and keep hoping things will finally change. They pour words into a place that was never built to hold respect. No contact starts when a person sees that words have lost their value in a space where care never truly lived. Then silence becomes the only language left that still protects the self. It is not passive. It is a decision. It draws a line. It says, this is where I stop. And once that line is drawn, everything begins to shift. Keep listening, because this is where the deeper truth begins. What makes this silence so powerful is that it removes access. Access to your emotions, access to your time, access to your reactions, access to the energy that once kept the whole unhealthy pattern alive. The moment you stop responding, explaining, or trying to repair what was built on imbalance, reality has to speak for itself. There are no arguments left for them to twist, no emotional moments to provoke, no explanations to pull apart and use against you. What remains is the truth, simple and hard to escape. No contact is also an act of trust in yourself. It means you no longer need someone else to confirm that what you felt was real. You stop bargaining with your own instincts. You stop betraying your inner voice just to keep a connection alive. Silence becomes a shield, not an empty space. It protects your nervous system. It protects your healing. It protects the parts of you that were worn down by confusion and stress. And in that quiet, something important starts to return. Your clarity, your strength, your own voice. That is why no contact is not weakness. It is restraint. It is discipline. It is self-respect in one of its strongest forms. And once that silence holds, something else becomes very clear. What they feel in your absence is not the clean pain of losing a loving bond. It is the shock of losing what you gave them. Because people with narcissistic patterns do not miss others the same way emotionally healthy people do. They miss access, they miss influence, they miss the emotional position they once had in your life. That is the part that unsettles them, not love lost, control lost, and that difference changes everything. Here's the part most people miss. Your silence is not just absence. To them, it feels like the end of a system they counted on. When you were there, your reactions fed the pattern. Your empathy mattered. Your willingness to forgive mattered. Your effort to explain, repair, and understand gave them something powerful. It gave them a sense of importance. You became the mirror that reflected their worth back to them. You became the person whose emotional response helped them feel central, significant, and in control. And when that mirror goes dark, it does not create healthy heartbreak in them. It creates panic. Not because they suddenly discovered deep love. Not because they finally learned your value in a mature and honest way, but because the structure they leaned on is no longer there. Silence unsettles them because they are not grieving a true emotional bond. They are dealing with irrelevance. They are feeling the loss of power over your time, your emotions, and your attention. They miss knowing they could disturb your peace. They miss knowing they could pull you back in. They miss knowing they could shift the story by getting you to respond. Without that access, they are left alone with themselves, and that is the place they usually avoid the most. To them, control often feels like safety. It helps hold together a fragile sense of identity. So when you stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop engaging, it feels like rejection, even if that was never your purpose. Your silence becomes a message they cannot easily reshape. They are no longer as important in your world as they once believed. And that realization hurts far more than simple loneliness. This is why their reaction after long no contact can seem dramatic, confusing, or out of proportion. The intensity is not proof of deep love coming back. It is proof that their grip is slipping. They are not reaching for shared tenderness. They are reaching for the position they once held in your inner life. And when that position is gone, they feel exposed. They feel unstable. They feel stripped of the control they thought would always be there. And when that control disappears, it does more than upset them. It shakes them at the core. Because for a narcissist, control is rarely just a habit. It becomes part of identity. They know who they are through the effect they have on others. Your responses, your availability, your emotional movement around them all become proof of their impact. So when you go quiet, it does not feel like healthy distance. It feels like erasure. Your silence forces them to face something they spend years trying to escape. A self that must exist without an audience. Without your replies, they cannot easily measure themselves. They cannot tell if they are admired, feared, desired, or needed. That uncertainty creates inner chaos. The image they worked so hard to protect begins to crack. That is why long no contact can disturb their identity so deeply. It removes the outside validation they use to build their sense of self. It leaves them with questions they do not want to answer honestly. Do I still matter? Am I still important? Was I ever as powerful as I believed? Those questions do not lead them calmly toward growth. They lead toward discomfort. And for someone who sees discomfort as danger, that feels unbearable. In that state, they may grow restless. They may become reactive. They may even become fixated. Not because they want true repair, not because they are suddenly ready for accountability, but because they want relief from the identity crack your silence created. Your absence shows them a truth they cannot control. They are no longer at the center of your world. And when someone has built their self-image around being central, being ignored feels like total collapse. Meanwhile, something beautiful is happening on your side of the silence. While their identity starts to wobble, yours begins to come back together. You stop shaping yourself around their moods. You stop organizing your peace around their approval. You stop carrying the job of keeping them emotionally steady. Piece by piece, your real self returns, and that is the quiet force of no contact. It does not only remove you from harm, it reveals who was depending on you to feel real and who you become when you stop carrying that burden. As their sense of self starts to shake, another truth settles in, and they are not ready for it. The space you once held does not stay empty in a way they can calmly manage. It turns into a void, not a thoughtful silence, not a peaceful gap. A hollow place that keeps reminding them something important is gone. They often try to replace it quickly because they believe people are interchangeable. New attention appears, new admiration appears, new faces step forward. On the surface, it may look like nothing changed, but inside, something feels off. The supply is there, yet it does not land the same way. That is because long no contact does not only remove you as a person, it removes the emotional role you played. You knew their rhythms. You recognized their shifts. You responded in ways that helped them feel powerful, seen, and central. New people do not mirror them in the same way. The reactions are different. The attention feels thinner. The bond lacks the same emotional pattern, even if it looks polished from the outside. This is when restlessness grows. They may surround themselves with noise, company, activity, and image management, yet still feel strangely unsatisfied. The void you left behind cannot be filled quickly because it was not just attention they were feeding on. It was familiarity. It was emotional imprint. It was the certainty that you would still be there. Long no contact makes that loss solid enough to be felt, not merely noticed. And then confusion grows. They thought you were replaceable, yet your absence keeps echoing, not because you were perfect, not because you were magical, but because you were consistent, because you were invested, because you cared in ways that left a mark. That emotional investment created an imprint, and time makes it harder to deny that fast replacements do not erase it. While they scramble to fill the emptiness, you begin learning a different lesson. You no longer live to fill anyone else's emotional holes. You are no longer here to soothe, stabilize, or prove someone else's worth. The void they feel is the result of losing access to your emotional labor. The peace you gain comes from finally taking that labor back. When that emptiness refuses to close, their inner world often starts spinning through a pattern that feels familiar. First comes denial. They tell themselves your silence is temporary. They assume you will come back once enough time passes. They downplay your absence. They shrink its meaning. They convince themselves they still matter in the same way. Denial helps them stay standing when reality threatens their image. But denial cannot hold forever if the silence stays strong. Then anger begins to rise. Rage follows. Not because they understand they were wrong, but because they feel challenged. Your absence feels like defiance. It feels like disobedience. It feels like you broke an invisible rule that said you would always stay available to them. Sometimes the anger is loud. Sometimes it is cold, bitter, and quiet. It can leak out through blame, sarcasm, contempt, or detached cruelty, dressed up as indifference. When anger wears itself down, curiosity often takes its place. They begin to check from a distance. They wonder, they listen, they replay conversations. They ask questions they never asked when you were actually there. Not to understand you in a caring way, but to understand how the story changed without their permission. Curiosity grows out of uncertainty, and uncertainty keeps bothering them. If no contact continues, curiosity can turn into obsession. Not obsession with healthy reunion, obsession with meaning, obsession with what your silence says about them, obsession with how you were able to pull away and stay away. They do not sit with the lesson, they circle it, they do not process the loss, they focus on regaining certainty. This cycle keeps repeating because it gives them movement without change. It keeps them emotionally active without requiring self-honesty. Meanwhile, your stillness breaks the loop. You are no longer trapped on the emotional ride they built. You stepped off, even while it kept spinning without you. And that is one of the deepest effects of long no contact. It shows who is actually growing and who is only reacting. Stay with this, because the next part explains why your healing itself can start to disturb them more than your silence ever did. As that cycle keeps turning on their side, something else begins to bother them even more. They start to notice change in you. Your calm, your steadiness, your distance, your ability to live without reacting to them. And that is when your healing becomes a threat. Growth exposes what stagnation works hard to hide. Your peace stands next to their chaos, and the contrast is sharp. Your emotional control highlights their volatility. Your quiet progress reflects everything they avoid facing in themselves. Without saying a word, your healing becomes a mirror. And that mirror can feel unbearable to someone who survives by avoiding deep self-examination. They do not see your healing as something beautiful. They do not feel inspired by it. They experience it as an accusation, as if your growth is silently saying, "I saw the truth and I chose better." Few things disturb a narcissistic person more than seeing someone step outside the role they were assigned. Your growth breaks the old version of reality, the one where they were superior and you were dependent. It interrupts the hierarchy that helped them feel powerful. Suddenly, they are no longer the center of your emotional life. They are no longer the final voice on your worth. And that shift threatens the illusion that protected their ego. This is why they may minimize your healing, mock it, or call it fake. Not because they truly believe that, but because admitting your growth would force them to see their part in your pain, and accountability feels like collapse to someone who survives on denial. But while they defend against truth, you are doing something very different. You are no longer shrinking yourself to keep the peace. You are no longer questioning your own reality just to keep connection alive. You are becoming whole, and that wholeness cannot be manipulated. It does not argue. It does not chase. It does not ask for permission to exist. It simply stands there, strong and quiet, and in that quiet strength, a truth becomes impossible to miss. You did not just leave the unhealthy dynamic, you outgrew it, and growth, when witnessed by someone who refuses to change, does not comfort them, it frightens them. When that fear sets in, they often reach for the defense that has protected them before, rewriting the story. Because if they cannot control your life anymore, they will try to control the meaning of what happened. The past starts changing in their version. Events are reshaped. Details are twisted. In this new story, you are no longer the one who tried, endured, cared, and held on longer than you should have. Instead, you become difficult, cold, oversensitive, impossible. The pain they caused quietly disappears into the background, and a new picture takes its place, one where they were misunderstood, mistreated, or unfairly pushed away. This is not reflection. It is self-protection. They tell this story to others, yes, but more importantly, they repeat it to themselves. Because facing the truth would mean seeing that they hurt someone who truly loved them. It would mean facing the cost of their own behavior. And that level of honesty threatens the fragile structure they built around themselves. So they revise, they reframe, they keep adjusting the narrative until the discomfort dulls just enough for them to function. Your silence makes this process easier in one way, because without your voice stepping in, they feel free to shape whatever version soothes them most. But even then, something still does not settle. because no matter how many times they repeat the new story, the ending remains the same. You are still gone. You are still calm. You are still healing. The story says they were right, but reality says they lost access to someone who no longer needs to explain anything. That gap creates tension. It is why the narrative keeps changing, becoming more dramatic, more distorted, more extreme. It is an effort to drown out the quieter truth that your absence keeps repeating. Meanwhile, you no longer need to correct the record. You know what happened because you lived it. Peace comes when you stop needing everyone else to agree with your experience before you trust it. Their revised story may defend their ego, but your clarity protects your future. And that is a far stronger kind of protection. Because once you stop fighting over the past, your energy can finally return to your own life. And yet, even after the story is rewritten and rehearsed, one thing still cuts through their defenses: your peace. No matter how they explain you away, your calm life without them feels personal. It feels like rejection, not the loud kind. Not the dramatic kind, the deeper kind, the kind that does not argue, does not plead, does not fight back, the kind that simply moves on. To them, your peace feels like a verdict, as if your silence is saying, I did not just leave, I chose myself. That choice can register in them like abandonment, even though you never promised to stay at the cost of your own well-being. They may read your calm as indifference, and indifference is something they struggle to tolerate. Anger they can provoke, sadness they can use, longing they can manipulate. But peace? Peace gives them nothing to work with. No opening, no leverage, no emotional handle to grab. That empty space feels unbearable. This is why they may try to disturb your calm. A sudden message, a dropped memory, a casual reminder of who they once were in your life. Not always to reconnect in any honest way, but to test whether they still have impact, whether they can still enter your system, whether they can still shake your balance. What they do not understand is that your peace is not a performance. It was earned. It was built through grief, confusion, temptation, and long stretches of choosing yourself even when it felt lonely. You did not become calm to send a message. You became calm because chaos was costing you too much. And that truth is hard for them to sit with. You did not walk away to punish them. You did not stay silent to be cruel. You simply stopped bleeding in the place that kept reopening the wound. Your peace is not really about them at all. It is a promise you finally kept to yourself. And once that promise becomes real, something else begins to disappear too. The need for answers, the need for one more conversation, the need for them to explain what they may never be honest enough to explain. There was probably a time when questions filled your mind. Why did they treat me this way? Did they ever really care? Was any of it real? Would one last conversation finally make it all make sense? Those questions can feel sharp, heavy, and impossible to ignore. For a long time, it may seem like closure is hiding inside one final talk, one proper apology, one honest explanation. But long no contact teaches something very different. Closure rarely comes through contact. It comes through clarity. With enough distance, patterns become visible. What once felt confusing starts looking consistent. What once felt deeply personal starts revealing itself as behavior repeated again and again. You begin to see that the pain was not caused by one isolated misunderstanding. It came from a long pattern of avoidance, manipulation, deflection, and refusal to take responsibility. And that understanding brings a quieter kind of resolution, one that does not depend on their honesty or self-awareness. They, on the other hand, often stay trapped in explanation seeking. They want to be understood without truly understanding anyone else. They want relief without accountability. They want the ending rewritten without changing the pattern that created it. But without reflection, there is no real clarity. There is only repetition. Your clarity frees you from having to revisit the past again and again. You no longer need them to validate your experience. You no longer need them to admit fault in exactly the right words. You no longer need the perfect apology to move forward. You have seen enough. You have felt enough. You know enough. And that knowing becomes grounding. It steadies your steps. It lets you move without dragging old confusion behind you. This is why long no contact feels so final. Not because the door is violently slammed shut, but because your mind is no longer standing there waiting for it to open. You have stepped fully into your own understanding. You are no longer asking truth to come from someone who keeps running from it. Clarity replaces confusion, acceptance replaces longing, and from that place, closure becomes something you create for yourself. Once that clarity takes root, something even more powerful begins to happen. The focus shifts. Slowly at first, almost so quietly you barely notice it, your attention stops revolving around them and starts returning to where it always belonged. You. Their reactions become less important. Their confusion matters less. Their attempts to change the story begin to feel distant, not because they never mattered, but because they no longer define the direction of your life. This is where the real victory appears, not in whether they regret losing you, not in whether they ever fully understand what they did, but in who you become because you finally chose yourself. You did not win by disappearing from their world. You won by rebuilding your own. You become emotionally unreachable, not in a cold way, not in a shut-down way, but in a grounded way. You stop pouring depth into spaces that only skim the surface. You stop offering tenderness to people who only value access. Your boundaries stop being emergency walls and become natural expressions of self-respect. And that changes every connection that comes after. While they stay reactive, measuring worth through outside responses, you begin living from inside alignment. You trust your instincts, you listen to your body, you notice red flags without arguing with yourself about them. The lessons were expensive, yes, but they changed you. And here is the quiet truth beneath all of it. Their reaction after no contact reflects what was taken from them. Your transformation after no contact reflects what was returned to you. You did not leave to make a speech. You left to survive, to breathe, to heal, to remember who you were before your voice got smaller and your reality was questioned. And by doing that, you became someone they can no longer reach. Not because you are hiding, not because you are pretending, but because you have risen beyond the place where their chaos once had access. That is the part that matters most, not their realization, your freedom, not their regret, your return to yourself. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. The silence you chose was not the end of your story. It was the moment you stopped leaving yourself behind. What started as distance became discernment. What felt like loss became freedom. What once scared you, life without them, slowly became the place where you found yourself again. You do not need to wait for them to miss you. You do not need them to regret you. You do not need them to finally understand you. Their reaction was never the true measure of your worth. Your healing is. Every day you stayed quiet. Every moment you resisted the urge to explain again, defend yourself again, or reopen the same painful door, you were choosing growth over old familiarity. That choice changed you. No contact did not make you cold. It made you clear. It did not harden your heart. It taught you where your heart is safe. It showed you that love without respect is not love. It showed you that connection without accountability is not connection. It showed you that peace is not empty. It is full of self-trust. Some people will never understand your silence because they benefited from your noise. They may call your boundaries cruel. They may call your calm indifference. Let them. You know what it cost to stay. You know what it took to leave. And that knowing is enough. So as you move forward, remember this. You are not difficult to love. You were simply loving in a place that could not meet you. And now you no longer need to prove, perform, or persuade. You are walking differently now. Speaking differently, choosing differently. Stay close to that version of yourself. Protect that version. Honor that version. Because the strongest message you ever sent was not in a final text, not in an argument, not in a speech. It was in the life you rebuilt after the silence. And that is how this story really ends.